morning, everyone. I hope everybody's staying safe and managing through this unprecedented time. This is an opportunity for us to do some education and some learning. So today we're very excited to have Dr. Elena Toth come speak with us about compliance in the regenerative medicine space for your practice. So this falls into a series of our network webinars that we're doing. Axiom is a provider of turnkey business and biologic solutions for independent practices throughout the US. So this is a compliance conversation. So obviously Elena is going to be going very deep, and there will be a lot of questions. So if you have questions during the presentation, save them for the end. And then subsequently, if you've got questions beyond that, we'll have a place at the end where you can send an email and reach out for more information about this topic or about the network or what Axiom may be able to do for you. So just to introduce presenters, Brandon Cusick, myself, Chief Operating Officer for Axiom Regenerative Therapies, responsible for all of our network partners. Did my graduate work and research at Harvard University, specifically Children's Hospital of Boston and the University of Kansas. We subsequently have done quite a bit of public health work abroad with medical missions and such. So we've worked with partners really globally who want to bring innovative products to the market, or in this case, biologics, understand the compliance landscape, understand how to do care coordination. And through this, we've really developed a very comprehensive program for providers to be able to administer regenerative therapies in their practice. And then joining me today, and the primary speaker of today's presentation is Dr. Elena Toth. She's a biomedical engineer, studied at the University of Limerick, and received her PhD in stem cell biology at Trinity College, Dublin. In her 6 years of researching, she really looked at bone marrow in particular, how it enables bone regeneration. But furthermore, she's worked with us in the last several years to help bring we're looking at a PMA in the marketplace for adipose and stromal vascular fraction, and she's helped us navigate the FDA landscape for bringing a product like that to market, as well as looking at all of our other therapies in our portfolio. So she has a great, not only interest, but a passion for cell therapy and clinical research involved. So we're very honored to have her. So I'm going to hand her off the mic. Elena, take it away.
Brandon, thank you for the generous introduction. Good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for making time to listen to me today talk about some of the regulatory landscape and how that influenced the practice of the introduction of biologics utilization for the regen medicine practice. So this is my disclaimer. I am a scientist. However, as a scientist, I do have to be aware of how the FDA landscape shapes the utilization of biologics. So what I am going to talk to you about today is just my opinion and based on my experience. However, if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat box. I may be able to provide some of the feedback, or we can certainly redirect you to legal counsel. So when I was asked to do the seminar today, I was starting thinking about what is actually the biologics market and how it was essentially introduced in the United States. At the historical, from a historical point of view, the introduction of cell therapies and novel biologics essentially produced a paradigm shift in the practice of modern medicine. So one of the first kind of product that I have found to be introduced in the United States was the recombinant human insulin in 1982. And afterwards, you have the first two stem cell therapy utilized for hematological diseases. And then again, the more recent one, you have the first cell gene therapy as a CAR T cell therapy used for lymphoblastic leukemia. And one of the more recent one, you have the first RNA-based therapy introduced in the United States for a specific type of neuropathy. So what exactly is the kind of the stem cell therapy that everybody talks about and it's become this hot topic in regenerative medicine. Where it is placed within this timeline? So the first stem cell clinical trial was actually performed in 1995, spearheaded by Lazarus and Kaplan, and it was a safety clinical trial to see if infusion of MSCs is actually safe. And from that point on, the MSCs have become this holy grail of medicine, that their ability to differentiate into different lineages and the ability to secrete factors that enable regeneration have brought about this explosion in potential utilization in very different clinical indications. And today it's being studied for a host of clinical diseases. So since 1995, the amount of clinical trials that have been put forward are hundreds, if not thousands. Just last year alone, 184 clinical trials have been registered on utilization of some kind of form of MSC type therapy. However, to date, what's interesting that there's no MSC cell product that is approved in the United States for any indication. But in spite of that, a study from 2016 found that 570 clinics in the United States alone advertise direct-to-consumer stem cell therapies with claims of curative action, and most likely the number of clinics to date are a lot more numerous. So in this paper that has been recently published by Christian Peen and colleagues from New York University Langone Orthopedic Hospital, here they actually provide a discussion on the ethical practice in direct-to-consumer advertising of stem cells and some of these claims that clinics make in relation to the utilization of stem cell therapies. So here are just some examples taken from the paper. Clinics advertise that stem cells, some kind of form of them, can regenerate injured cartilage, or there's different musculoskeletal tissues, that again, MSCs can get you new undamaged tissue, or some of them are a bit more traceous, that the stem cells, once you inject them, they can turn into wherever you want them to be in the joint. This is a curative treatment. You can literally grow new joint tissue. From a scientific perspective, coaxing stem cells to differentiate into a specific lineage is a very complex and highly organized process. So these claims really do not meet the clinical and scientific evidence. So this has brought about certainly an explosion of direct-to-consumer advertisement of stem cell therapies and similar biologics, which has certainly in some aspect affected the regenerative medicine industry, because these claims have brought damage to some of the patients that have been treated by unscrupulous clinics. So here's one example of one of the more recent ones, where a physician advertises the use of stem cells by inhaling to protect against the coronavirus. There's no clinical evidence to support this, but yet here you go, this is being advertised on Instagram. So because of this rampant direct-to-consumer claims that it really lags behind the clinical evidence, the FDA has certainly made a stance and set a framework of guidelines on how to be compliant with the utilization of biologics in a safe and efficacious manner. So certainly FDA has put their foot forward and released a few public statements in relation to stem cell products. And here are some of the notable comments that they made, given some of the interesting practices that companies have put forward. So you've had clinics that will falsely advertise that you do not need FDA review and approve their stem cell therapies, and that's clearly not true. You do need some form of application to get your product approved based on extensive clinical research. And there's one claim that has been quite rampant in the industry that I've noticed, that the companies who claim that having their companies just being inspected, that they're GMP compliant, equates to some kind of FDA approval and endorsement, and that is not true. If you have a stem cell product or some kind of product related to stem cells, you do need regulatory approval for its utilization in clinic for a particular claim to treat a specific disease. And similarly, clinics will advertise that they conducted clinical trials, although they do not have put all the framework to conduct a clinical trial to utilize these products. So patients should be aware of, if you do go forward with a clinical trial method to investigate a product, you need to have the right framework to conduct them. And having just an IRB signed off clinical trial may not be sufficient depending on how complex that cell therapy product is. There are certainly some exceptions to that. So the governing bodies that govern the regulation of these products are essentially the FDA, where their role is to protect the public health by ensuring the safety and the efficacy of the products utilized to better the human health. But also the FTC plays a role in making sure that the advertisement of these products are not fair or deceptive in any way. So in terms of the regulation of biologics in regenerative medicine, the FDA put forward a regenerative medicine framework of guidelines. So these are just a few of them that pertain for the common practice of regenerative medicine. So the first one is the 21 CFR 1271, which discusses the regulatory considerations for human cells, tissues, and cellular and tissue-based products, commonly known as HCTPs. And here discusses 2 points in terms of the minimal manipulation of the tissues and the homologous utilization of them in clinical practice. And within this guideline, you have the same surgical procedure exception, which discusses some of the exceptions to this rule, as well as Public Health Safety Acts 351 and 361. In addition to that, there are 2 other frameworks that discuss the use of regenerative medicine for serious conditions or more advanced type of products that require clinical research. And so these are commonly known as the RMAT. So today I mainly focus on the 21 CFR 1271 and what does it mean for, how does it affect the utilization of the biologics within physician's practice. So 21 CFR 1271 gives a description of what are these HCTPs and particularly what they are and how their sourcing, manufacturing, and clinical use can affect how they are regulated within the United States. So the HCTP means any article that contains or consists of human cells, tissues that are intended for implantation, transplantation, infusion, or transfer into human recipient. So the sourcing, how it's manufactured or clinical use, if it's in a manner that preserves its initial properties and it's used in a manner that doesn't fall outside its intended use based on the manufacturer claims, may require just a quick registration and can be utilized under 361 guidelines. However, if the product is sourced and manufactured in a more complex manner and requires clinical trials or research to define what are these sourcing and manufacturing complexities and clinical utilization for a clinical claim, well, under the 351 guideline, these will be drugs or devices and may require IND application for biological license or may require an IDE clinical study for a PMA application. So under the 361 Act, the HCTPs are considered to have certain properties to be considered as such. One, they have to be minimally manipulated. So if I have a tissue or cell-based product, it has to be minimally manipulated. It has to be used in a homologous way. The manufacture of the HCTP cannot or should not involve a combination of cells or tissues with any other article. And in addition to that, there are two stipulations. One, it does not have a systemic effect, or the second one, it has a systemic effect if it's used in a homologous manner for certain cell-based HCTPs. So types of HCTPs that are considered as such, and these are directly taken from the guidance, are structural tissues such as bone, ligaments, skin, dura mater, heart valve, etc. So these tissues are taken from a donor. They are minimally manipulated just to preserve their structure, and they're utilized in a manner that is similar to where they are taken from. And then you also have cell-type HCTPs, such as hematopoietic progenitor cells, as I mentioned, when they used to replenish hematopoietic stem cells, and then also there are other type of cell types, kind of device structures that also fall under this guideline, such as the manipulated autologous chondrocytes, and there are certain products that are on the market. So these are 361 products. They require just registration and make sure that the devices are produced in a GMP compliant manner. So as part of these 361 guidelines and 21 CFR 1271, the minimum manipulation and homologous use are two descriptions that have certainly found that physicians may not fully understand, or there'll be some kind of confusion related to it. So minimal manipulation means that if you take a tissue from a donor, be it whether for autologous or allogeneic use, the process of it, of the manufacture of a tissue, must retain majority of these properties. And if you alter those properties, then you're creating something that is more artificial. And as such, that product requires further study to make sure it's safe and it's potent and its use is utilized in a manner that it actually produces the desired result. In terms of homologous use, the donor tissue or HCTP should perform a similar function from where it was derived. So if you use a donor tissue and utilize it in a way that is not similar to its donor function, then this is a new application, and you'll have to file for the right marketing approval to show that its intended new use, it actually works. So there's certainly other types of tissues that are actually not considered HCTPs, and they fall under different regulations on how they can be compliant in its clinical utilization. So vascularized tissues for human transplantation is not one of them. The whole blood or blood derivative products, they also not considered HCTPs. It's same for secreted or extracted human products, as well as minimally manipulated bone marrow for homologous use. And the reason I have highlighted these three products is because these are some of the most commonly used in regenerative practice, at least for orthopedics, which is my experience. So for blood-based products, you have the platelet-rich plasma, which is commonly utilized and very vastly researched. Then you also have amniotic fluid and also bone marrow concentrate. So how are these products regulated if they do not fall under the 21 CFR 1271? So the 21 CFR 1271 has an exception to this ruling. So it states that you are not required to comply with the requirements of this part if you're an establishment that removes HCTPs from an individual and implants such HCTPs into the same individual during the same surgical procedure. So if you take tissue from one location, you minimally manipulate it, you use it in a homologous use, and you implant it back into the same donor, then it complies with this exception. So bone marrow and adipose tissue, they are structural tissues that are essentially can be exempt under this ruling. For example, for the bone marrow product, if you use a 510K device, the minimal manipulation applies if you use a bone marrow concentrate. For example, centrifugation, where you concentrate the bone marrow, will be considered to be minimal manipulation. If you isolate a cell fraction and then you're expanding it outside of the human body artificially, then you're creating a drug, and that will not be considered to be minimal manipulation, and that will be considered for most likely an IND for biological license application. If you take the bone marrow concentrate, which is compliant under the minimal manipulation ruling, and you use it to treat bone marrow lesions, that will be considered a homologous use because they take bone marrow from one part of the bone and utilize it in another part of the bone. If you utilize the bone marrow as an IND infusion to treat heart dysfunction, that will not be considered homologous because you're treating a disease state for which the bone marrow has no direct link, and the method of delivery has also not been studied today. So there are many unknown effects that need to be discerned. Recently, American Association of Interventional Pain Physicians published this paper, and they put forward several statements on the use of bone marrow as a biologic. And what they found is that when it comes to manufacturing of bone marrow for clinical use as a bone marrow concentrate, there's a strong evidence that most of the physicians do follow the guidelines. They understand this preparation in terms of minimal manipulation. However, when it comes to the clinical utilization, there's moderate evidence for homologous use for various musculoskeletal and spinal conditions, meaning that some of them are used in a homologous manner and some of them may not be considered. So you have to have an understanding if it's a homologous utilization, and if it's not, and under what criteria you may not use it in a homologous manner. Another statement put forward is that in terms of the clinical evidence for the utilization of bone marrow, there are certain mixed results, and these therapies are greatly outpacing the evidence. So if you're considering utilization of a bone marrow concentrate product, make sure that you familiarize yourself with the clinical research prior to entertaining the bone marrow to be one of the workhorse in your practice. So as I mentioned, the adipose tissue is still considered as a structural tissue, and adipose tissue is quite prominently utilized in the regen market. Again, make sure that you utilize mainly a 510K device. Do not attempt homebrew systems for, again, safety concerns. So minimal manipulation would be mainly mechanical resizing, commonly known as microfragmented fat. However, if the adipose tissue is digested with enzymes or certain cellular fractions are taken from it, then you're creating a drug as per FDA definition. So minimal manipulation will be mainly microfragmented fat. In terms of homologous use, application of microfragmented fat for dermal fillers or via surgical augmentation is a compliant use. But if you claim to treat diabetic neuropathy with adipose products, that certainly can be a challenging claim to make. So the blood-based therapies, as I mentioned, PRP, are also quite predominant in the regen market. There are a lot of 510K devices, and have you read the 510K clearance for them, you find that the approval, or it's not approval, the clearance for these PRP-based devices is to mix with bone graft materials to enhance bone graft handling properties in orthopedic practices. Some of them are actually also cleared for management of exudicutaneous wounds. However, a lot of physicians will use the PRP for many other indications, such as mitigating OA symptoms, and that will be considered off-label use and will fall under the medical practice. but it's good to be aware of what is the initial application for the device and whether how you utilize it falls is outside and whether its utilization are still compliant with its intended use. APIC A2M system is another blood-based therapy, and here's just to give you an example. The utilization of the APIC A2M product was studied for lower back pain, and they found the A2M to actually be a good, potentially good therapy to treat low back pain. And in the same paper, they actually explicitly say that the PRP is actually used for mainly to manipulate bone graft properties, and that to use the APIC A2M as a therapeutic for low back pain would be considered to be an off-label application. So here, I'm showing here an FDA warning letter to highlight that if you're entertaining to use biologics from an allogeneic source, to make sure that you're utilizing companies that have a GMP-compliant laboratory and they are inspected by the FDA, because many of them most likely may not comply with the FDA regulations or have lapses. And historically, there have been cases where the lapses in FDA compliance have led to production of allogeneic biologics that have harmed patients. So if you're entertaining the use of allogeneic products, you can look up the company names on the FDA website to see if they have had a history of warning letters or not. So how do you stay compliant in the practice of regenerative medicine? First of all, start with making sure that you comply with the truth in advertising law set by Federal Trade Commission. They actually set a standard on how to make these claims, and they put forward that if you make a therapeutic claim for biologic, it has to be based on clinical studies of level 1, where you have safety and efficacy data published. So in such case, PRP has so many clinical studies to date to show that it can be safe and efficacious in terms of mitigating the OA for certain joints. However, you have to remember that that claim will be specific for the device that has been used in that specific claim. So make sure that the claim you use is not just for the biologic, but is reflective of the device you use. And second, that correctly advertise the name of a biologic to utilize. So not everything is an MSC-based product. If you utilize a bone marrow concentrate, call it as such, or you can call it a bone marrow cell therapy or adipose cell therapy. Make it more generic, make it more reflective of what it is. And do not fall into the trap of calling them stem cells as a clickbait because everybody does so. Just be more advanced in terms of the terminology utilized. Certainly within the orthopedics, orthobiologics has become one of the new names to refer to such therapies or biologics. So here's just an example that FCC does step forward when the truth in advertising law is not compliant with. And again, Google as a third party has also intervened and have banned advertisement of stem cell ads. And how do you stay compliant from an FDA perspective? Well, first of all, if you utilize biologics, make sure you use FDA 510K cleared devices. Do not use homebrew. I've heard physicians buying PRP tubes from Alibaba to make PRP. And there's research out there to show that if you use different types of tubing, you can actually have leaching of materials or microparticles, and you don't know what will be the after effect. So make sure you utilize at least devices that have been viewed by the FDA. Second, understand what is the regenerative medicine guidelines of the framework to know whether the HCTPs you use are compliant or not, or if you do not use HCTPs and how you can still be compliant. Again, third, make sure if you utilize allogeneic products that they are manufactured in FDA-approved GMP facility. I have experience with manufacturers claiming that they have some kind of compliance, kind of generally loosely referred to, but ask for that certification, ask for those materials to make sure that the product's actually safe and are not contaminated. If there are adverse events due to these products, particularly generic, you can utilize the FDA MedWatch program to report the adverse events, because most likely if your patients have an adverse event, if there's a bacterial contamination, somebody else may have it as well. Understand the difference between FDA approved and FDA cleared. As I mentioned, the PRP is FDA cleared device, means utilization is actually not regulated. Well, its intended use is for bone grafting material, but off-label use is falls under the practice of medicine. So some people actually say that FDA is approved, PRP is approved by the FDA, which is not true, or the others can claim that certain therapies are approved, and that may just be that they are actually regulated different, or the clearance is slightly different. So just understand that the difference between approved and cleared is vast. Approved requires extensive clinical research, cleared requires just a registration. And last but not least, become a science guru when it comes to biologics. Be familiar about what you utilize, how can it be utilized, and what are potential complications related to it, because some of these are not as extensively studied biologics compared to others. And this is a very young field, and as Asif have mentioned, the clinical use outpaces the evidence. So be forthcoming, and if you utilize these products, make sure that engage in research and publish some of these cases, because they'll certainly be able to help other physicians. So at this point, I'll cap it up. So as I said, if you have any questions, even just from a scientific or even FDA, give us either put them in the chat box. We may be able to answer them, provide some feedback, or we can redirect you to the right resources.
All right, thank you, Elena. Just want to really thank you for outlining a lot of the compliance issues that folks run into and really giving a good understanding of the landscape right now. It can be a bit of a mess and quite confusing out there, but certainly having some clarity or having good guidance is really key to getting through this. And we see a lot of thriving practices who are doing things correctly and have the opportunity to work with some of them. Just to reiterate, this is a series that we're running every Wednesday at 1 p.m. East Coast time, where we'll be outlining all the different aspects of a regenerative practice and running a cash pay regenerative practice. And at this point, I think I want to hand it over to Rachel to help moderate any questions that folks have. I think there's a couple that have come through already.
Absolutely. The first question is it true that Google will block any mention of PRP on a website?
So the answer to that one is not necessarily on a website. Where Google's stance is today is that they have effectively banned advertisements, which is digital advertisements on their Google Ads network, where you cannot use certain terminology referring to regenerative medicine. They have included PRP and some of those things, but if you have PRP listed on your website and you've described it accurately, there really shouldn't be an issue. The concern is rather representing PRP as something that it's not. So if you have stem cell listed next to PRP, they'll use website crawlers to go through and start to identify certain terms that are used in conjunction with one another. Now, the enforcement is typically slower to follow on that. Again, if you're running ads, what they can do is quickly shut down an ad account. But beyond that, they typically will just look at it, send a notice of some sort, and then you'll have an opportunity to modify or change that. But great question, because marketing these products is certainly a concern for a lot of practices who want to represent their regen side of their business, but want to do it correctly.
Thanks, Brandon. The next question reads, as a private practice, am I able to perform my own study looking at different treatment methodologies? If so, where do I start?
Elena, I'll let you take that one. Elena, are you there? You're on mute.
Yes, thank you for reminding me. That's a great question. Anybody can become a principal investigator to study these biologics. Depending on the type of biologic you want to study, you may just have to have a clinical study approved by an IRB if it's an HCTP or it's a low-risk product. But if you have something that is more complex, such as a specific cell therapy or biologic, you may have to file for an IND application, and that usually is a kind of a multi-million affair. And so it depends what you want to study. In terms of who can help you out, if you're a small practice, I would suggest to engage with a contract research organization, and we may help you with that. We certainly have used contract research organizations for our own research. If you're a more established practice with a connection to a hospital, they may be able to help you out and put you in touch with the right personnel.
Thanks, Elena. The last question we have is, do you consider exosomes 351 or 361?
That is an excellent question, and this question has been addressed by the FDA on their last public statement released in November of last year. They state that the utilization of exosomes making a particular clinical claim is considered to be a biological product and does require to be filed for an IND-related study. Currently, the way the regulations are written, they state that it's a secretion, and as a secretion, it's not considered to be as an HCTP. But also, what does it mean? That as a secretion, it may not solely be regulated under the 21 CFR 1271. You may have other regulations involved in its marketing. So if anybody wants to utilize exosomes for any particular clinical indication, they can inquire FDA. There's a TRIP program called TRG Rapid Response Program. They can send their questions about the utilization of exosomes, and the FDA will provide you feedback when and how these products can be utilized and under what framework.
Thank you, Elena. Is there a resource clinicians can turn to partner with an organization to get involved with clinical research?
In terms of partnering with a clinical research, there are many ones that you can find them looking them up through a web domain. There's one that we are familiar with called Clinical CTI, Clinical Trial Consulting Company. They are a fantastic company. We have good experience with them, and they can help you out to determine what kind of clinical trial framework may be suitable for you depending on the product. and there many others can help you out. I think it's really just a matter of who you know, or if you know somebody that has specific experience with a particular clinical research organization. And as I mentioned, hospitals, they run clinical trials, and if you have colleagues that work in hospitals, you may ask them about if there's a particular research a department within the hospital that may be interested in kind of pitching in. I'll help you out.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you both, Elena and Brandon, for speaking and presenting today. And thank you to everyone who joined us.